나는 저기 나 된이 신비기 내가 저기 심지 참마랑기 류다 소디베 자치모다 예치무슈지레 델리아 네바체바 인네바체제 델리아는 지소 줘바이나 배마슬로 펌보레스 디나싱은 저기 당한지 계시쇼 대가지 가리네 저기 디기리스 거야 돼서 디기리스 제사당한테 디기조 유디 개와사야래 제사데 개와마사바체 나는 저기 디도죠 디빌레가 제바이나 로팜보레스 디네 장은 저기 기회 잡아 강도도 주고래서 지 안되는 쉬로와 아니 나는 저 기회 잡아 괜히 주고래서 나보 좀 다나가서 당고래서네 아주 다지 유리된디베서 제니에 가와 임바 대도시나 삼당고래서 톱가와래서 디 톱가와이 미김전에 가서네 디규 개와 아니 지 수림소야다 서버고미야 전혀서미야 안 돼서 죽가와 인자 진도는 예가와래서 당아주 밀리름 뭐지 토바디 빼마서 개치 뭐시고 짜치 뭐시고리에 가서 류된 델 양아 저게 지 랑게 디기 주비야 샹레 판도 주비야 언제게 체디기 디기 주비야다 동아세야 안개와치마 라다미 고바토야다 딘타바트 탐지기 벽고바토 람냠네 차상아주 류된 델지 투고레스 도스제나 삼다냥아주 류된 빼 짜치 뭐레스 근데 이내다 짜치 뭐레디 이내 저선 지게 매버스의 치위 게임망고 시우여서 그지치 내봐요 말했어. 제사다 디네 인사다 마시위 빠라들이야 개와디 풍선 소파디 어디 죽고 거래서 이제 언도 지나가 저기 디르쇼게 삼다다디 디네세서 당도 이거 쉬르바다 되는.
Good afternoon. So this morning, in the verses that we looked at, we saw how what we value more than anything else is our body and life, and we do all that we can to take care of this life, to maintain our life and to look after our body. However, this is a bit discordant with our underlying desire, which is for lasting happiness, a happiness that's freed from suffering. So rather than have as our foremost priority the looking after our body and life, we should have as our foremost priority creating the causes for lasting, stable happiness. This is what should be our first priority, accumulating those causes, and together with that, refraining from or abandoning accumulating causes that lead to suffering. And what are the causes? The foundation is to develop the causes that will lead to a further good rebirth. Ethical restraint, generosity, patience, choice, perseverance, and prayer. Those causes that we have accumulated in the past and whose results we are enjoying in this life. These need to be accumulated in order to continue to receive a precious human rebirth. And as we saw, though, achieving a precious human rebirth, which is marked by the freedoms, the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, this is something that is quite difficult to do. And we can recognize that it's difficult by just how rare it is. And moreover, nevertheless, though, whilst it's difficult to do and rare, it is something of great meaning. It can achieve a tremendous purpose. Those were some of the meditations we looked at, and the final meditation was to recognize that this situation of this precious human rebirth is not stable. We relate to it as if it's unchanging, as if there's this immense stretch of time before us and we will get another again. But the reality is, our situation is not stable. Our life can come to an end due to any number of reasons. It can be so easily lost. And the final conclusion that we looked at this morning is to come to the outcome, not to delay, not to continue to wander around with our mind distracted by meaningless affairs, but rather to keep at the forefront of our mind at all times the accumulation of virtue.
나는 자다 저기 가서 저기 밀리르마 다지 류된디니 가와레 대안이 가와레 아니냐 반에 배 돈다 침보 기 침보 판도 침보레 사다 안데 뉴월이야 인지발레 라와레 게임하고 요래서 되네 삼다야디 디 삼당고 비김제 가르스나 디 삼다와이나 안다 디 땅이도 안델라 때네 저기다 세델이야 저기 Geshe Thubten Rabten, and Tibetan, 두되게 dimba shurun zhoya dang di gyawa dhubyaji jawala zomyagi chedu di samdang kukor. Di samdang bayi na dini gechoo dhubyagi pechoo cheya dang jawala zomyagi zombadi yungkorwa. Dini sadi samdang kuwa di dusriya sikor.
The reflection first on precious human rebirth is to recognize what we have achieved, that we have these freedoms and endowments. Secondly, to reflect on just how difficult and rare it is to achieve such a rebirth so that we truly value it. And then thirdly, that this has great potential. We can achieve something of great value with this life. That's the third point. Then the fourth is moving to the impermanence of this life, to recognize that not only will we die, but the time and manner of our demise, of our death, is completely unknown. Death can come at any time, and it is completely unpredictable because of the wide number of reasons or causes that can lead to the ending of this life. So then, what was the purpose of these reflections? The reflection on precious human rebirth and death and impermanence. It's to develop a mind that is focused and stable, and focused in a manner that's stable and powerful, so that our occasional yearning to utilize this life well, that becomes stable and powerful, and we can then, with great ease, turn away from what lacks meaning and keep our mind at all times fixated on the accumulation of the causes for lasting happiness. This is the purpose of this meditation. Now, continuing to look at practices that need to be engaged in, we come to the 12th verse. Positive and negative causes and effects are subtle and non-deceptive. Keep dependence arising in mind from today. The root of spiritual and temporal well-being has not been attained due to conceit. Sustained meditation concentration needs to be practiced.
다지선 간나레데 세대한 저게 가보다 레 가보다 레 나보 시고라 레 가보다 레 나보 레 가보라네 개벨레 될라고 레 나보라네 미기벨레 될라고 그래. 지사다 레 가보다 개벨레담 레 가보 개벨레다 나보 미기벨레기 대부 충충지네 밀로아레스 유아레스 그러다 가지래. 베네 레 가보 충충지사베네 디 대부 충충지 레기레스 이 말마도 디 규충충 제부디 기게 말했어요 말고 근데 레 나고 충충지네 디 대부 용그레스 제가 레 가보 첨부이네 디 대부 충이나 대부 거래 첨부이나 대부 거래 다나 레가나 카리비네 디 대부들라 치숑세 밀루와레 용그레스 레가나 레 가나 레제 차왕 세데다 차와라네 레 충충세 되네 시네 근데 규 충충 간에 시네 디 대부디 네 밀루아레스 제보도 영야데 땡케바레스 월다 되네게 간날레제 차왕 밀루아 충충어스 그런데
So we can just make some changes to the translation in the first line. Even small, so this is new, even small positive and negative causes and effects are non-deceptive. So what are translated as subtle and should be rather even small. Even small positive and negative causes and effects are non-deceptive. So the Tibetan doesn't say positive and negative, it says black and white. The meaning of black and white karma is virtuous and non-virtuous, or positive and negative. So this line then says that even small virtuous or positive karmic causes are non-deceptive in that they will lead to results. And if they are positive, they will lead to results of happiness. Similarly, if even small non-virtuous or negative causes, they are non-deceptive in that they will lead to effects. So therefore, we should recognize that small virtues and non-virtues are non-deceptive in that they lead to a result of happiness or suffering.
samlo chung shi na chenpo ina dene samlo de la samlo de le ka bo se ro ke le se go ba ke wa re se ke le se go re de sa da nga ji samlo da ji ge bene dunga ju ne de bo dunga ya ki ju ji samlo ji ko ba na de samlo de la le na boss de sa di ju le se mi ge le se 아주 최직시의 기회를 미기를 해서 당연히 지난 최직 기시마샤바는 유사 차그로 유 제가 규례한 저게 지게 셈경어 규베 규 난 치수경어 규라마를 용으로 규라 베네 사번디기 규로와 베네 신도 답이야 사번제 답에 사번디기 규라기로 하다 진짜 디나싱한테 셈긴 톤에 동어용하게 유 아니 삼노다야 직지용으로와 되는 셈기 때문에 디기용이 두비하게 규 아니 지게 규대 삼노 셈 지용으로 돼서라 개회라다 미기회리에서데 레에서데 레에서 다디 제보들라 아니 지게 규디기 제보들라 제보사 시시거와 제산다 제가 저 균제기 기시거래 제산 삼노 되니시 담배나 디기 제보 약고 쉬운 거래 삼노 되니시 다네 디 제보 동아 쉬운 거래 사지 제산 균제에서 제산 충충하서 당한테 디소라다 충충에 다 기회 삼로 충충이나 다디 충충마다 민도 삼제 낭매제 다 샤야셔와 디 낭매 지교 말해서 기회 자와 충충지네 삼당 거디 제보 쉬운 거래서 제보 영화래서 제보 디기 쉬운 거래서 용용 그래서 당한테 가브렐야 지게 삼로 지금 미기회 삼로 충충지나 디디 충충을 가야 말씀 남에 다죠 디 다교 말해서 미기회 삼로 충충 담배는 디 제보 동아 쉬운 거와 동아 제보 두 그래서 제가 그런 게 가네시나 그런 제보시 용거를 했을 때 되네서 지금 레제 송고에 빼면서 개침을 해서 그러다. 말매다 제자도 레 지단 귤라고서 레제서 지단 사본이 될 귤라고와 수기모 집에 사본들 규스베지 레스베지 당겨 말아 다땡아도 셈기 톤에 규딜라 동아여의 규단 디기여의 규제 셈들라 레스베지 당거 지사 레스 식디 만데 셈기 톤에 사베기 다 규디기여의 제부여의 규딜라 레스베지 당거 레지로라.
In this line, the term cause and effect has been used. So cause and effect is a word that we use in the Buddhist context, but it's also terms that are used in society. Another term would be seed. So you plant a seed, you get a plant follows. And we talk in society about causes and results, causes and effects. The term karma, though, is a word that we just use in the religious context. And it also, when you use karma, then this term refers specifically to the mind, in that is where the karma is created and karmic seeds or karmic imprints are placed on the mental continuum. So the word karma is used specifically to refer to the mind. Cause and effect can be used in that way, but it can also be used in a much more general way, like how we would utilize it in society. If one wants to achieve a particular result in one's life, one creates various causes. But to the intended meaning here from Lama Tsongkhapa, even small positive and negative causes and effects are non-deceptive. What we should take from this is that all the causes we create, positive and negative, small and large, have an impact on our future lives. So our future lives are being impacted by the causes we are creating now. And with this recognition, we should not dismiss what's smaller karmic causes, or dismiss smaller karmic causes, seeing them as insignificant. We should rather strive to take care of our mind at all times and not be deceived by the attitude that I can relax my mindfulness. Because what I'm doing now is not so important, or the way I'm thinking now, it's not so important. These imprints will be insignificant. We shouldn't think like that. We should ensure that we avoid even small non-virtuous imprints and accumulate even small virtuous imprints, because they accumulate, they matter.
anda dine ge za da kana le de shishun gane shime ne milu wa jibu de yan re se de da don da la kar song go ra se ne che za da ngar zu ge dan xue lu ye ga wa tuan che wa nam chi nge ba me sam da che da dine za da ben nam chi nge ba me ba re se ge di chi nge ba yo ma re sam da do o da nga de ji jo ge shu ba na xin da da de nga tin twin gen cha sang cha de tang da yo go go yu de ga bla da ge we le de 같이 내 첨부이나 충주나 같이 투두징의 냠len 지기 되네 개빈 디비레디 최종 간다시 나게 바빵기 냠len 지기매 바빵기 지주금에서 두섬 나제 개빈 냠len 제고래서 돈다는 가지고 냠len 제고래 송거로.
To combine this with what we've looked at already, all that we are experiencing now, that we are experiencing in this life, has come about in dependence on causes that we ourselves have created in lives previous to this. Recognizing that then, when we turn our attention to lives yet to come, we see the importance to utilize this opportunity well, to not merely enjoy the karmic results of our endeavors from past lives, but we need to also continue to create virtuous causes for future lives. And together with this, the causes we create, we should ensure remain on the side of virtue, those white stones, and we avert creating any further non-virtue or black stones. And not wait just for great opportunities to do something wholesome, but to embrace smaller opportunities to accumulate virtue as well.
dine da ga nyamlen che sam da di da nyamlen che su sam lu dang go le se ge ba da sam lu na le jang de che go ya ne yang de che go le se nyamlen che se de da di che di da ga du sin de ji ka sa da dine shu shu ba na ji re da bo ko ran ne nga zo ya ji kun lo ma so na da nga so nge du nga de le de ka nga dine sha da nga so nge du nga de le ma tha na thap min du de le thar chi ne ani ji ge wa chi mai ne 다리네 밀리 토바나 신께와 침마나 라다 미고바 토바 지긴 선배 삼다 공론 되니 삼다 공론 디토네 당에 라다 미고바 토비 규리 가려서 룽아 이순 예제도 추림들이 지당에 룽아 이순 요건에 샤라 네베 자와서 자와든 지금에 선배 삼다 디 삼나데 야네 야도 다 디 공론 되래 야네 야도 삼되네 삼나 디다데 삼나데 야네 야도 땅 안디토네 니베데 손바데라데네 땅에 류롱제 계속다 제바 찬제 샹리아 지야 권철을 쳐부에다 샹리마 안진비 진바 땅제 샹리 판배지 두기 땅이 선배게 삼는다 안디니 토네 소소 삼는디 땅에 토네 소소게다 니베 강저야 권철이야 지게 최고부야 지금에도 부야다 취매부야라 소바다 되네 강부야 여바 부야다 안샹리아 판배기 지금 자와 가르 주토다 제바나 아두스는 냠렌지야체 되네 아직 삼다지야 안신기 지금 가브리엘이야 신기 소술이 녀바체제 지는 녀바기다 같이 추수 줘발아서 바체베네 델리아 콘르말라와체 안파 주세보금 그 선배 삼났다 나디 멤비게다 양 랑소소라는 게 개인 냠는 제발이야 깔레카제 지깔레카야다 되네 녀도 차베나 되네 델리아 쇠바 쇠투바 제제 냠는 무신 제투바 지인 선배 삼다야 두치네 삼단의 쇠비 삼다에 내가 냠는 제바서 되네 삼당 고래서 그래 안디 젤리아 안소수기 개위 자와 되네게 제바데 배 야고래서는 가신 조신 제바들라 존주세 되네 지금 Dinigida, Javi Gawa Trutubati, and the Tamalians, Molam Jedu, or the Dinigi gave it our delatine, my Kiwachima, the Hadami, Lutin Yakush Tobar Show, Din Delia, and the Shenley, Pempa Yashimu Tobar shows and begin, or do Shin some daddy, Danganzuki, Kiwachima, Hadami, Toyaki, Yu, Garbile, said the Garbi lady, Yamli Jagore said, on Diana and somebody that does Yamin Bezucheva in that. The Chike Lada Muko want to be you Garby lady, Yamlenchi or Yamlenchi or then Yamlenchi was in detail, then Giwachima, Manzuya Lada Muko want to have the Tindela, Digi to Yadi, Yimbare, Miluares, they were a touch of Ares or on Dusina some tango essay. Then Yamlenchi Rimba Dambodi Tisumorda.
It's been mentioned many times that the process of meditation is one of habituation, where we are striving to develop new habitual ways of thinking and break non-virtuous habitual ways of thinking. And this involves engaging in the meditation on the same topics again and again. So there is a lot of repetition in order to bring about creating new habits. So with that in mind, then just to repeat some of the key points that have been presented, because when one is really familiar with this, one can have this in one's mind when going about one's daily activities. And in this way, one doesn't confine one's mental training to teaching environments or the meditation cushion, but can have this as one's active thought process when going about one's regular mundane activities. So one can bring awareness to the fact that every instance of animal life that one observes is a sentient being that fell to the lower realms. They once had a human life, and then when they breathed out for the last time in that life, the very next moment they were in the animal realms, now as an insect perhaps. And how would it be if this were to happen to me? In the next instance, this life were to end and I was to take rebirth as an insect like this. What could I do about my situation? How could I remedy my situation? And you'd recognize how helpless we would be, how hopeless our situation would be. We would be without assistance and guidance, and we would not have the capacity, the intellectual capacity, to do anything about our situation. Recognizing that, merely from seeing some insect life, is a jolt to our way of thinking, and brings about a determination: I must close the door to such a potential rebirth. I must ensure I cultivate an ethical outlook. I need to make this commitment of I will not bring harm to others, at the very foundation of my way of thinking. I will not bring harm to others through my physical behavior, my way of speaking, or my way of thinking. Another way of expressing this is I will refrain from the 10 non-virtuous actions. And not only do I now commit to strengthening my resolve to bringing no harm to others, but I will also strengthen my commitment to being of benefit to others. Wherever I can, I will show them kindness and care and help and assistance. Where I have an abundance in terms of material goods, I'll share it with others. Even if it means my leftover food to animals, I will share what I have in abundance with others. Where I have skills and talents, I'll share this with others. I'll make offerings to the 3 jewels so as to strengthen my connection with them. Where I find a being in danger, I will help them. I will try and save their life. In brief, I will give of myself to help others. And thirdly, with this basis of the commitment not to bring harm to others, but rather to benefit, this comes from an already established understanding that others matter. And I will develop this view, I'll develop my valuing of others, holding them dear, no matter what is tormenting them and how they express themselves towards me, I will hold them dear. And in this way, I'll be patient with whatever hardships I receive from others. And where I receive hardships in terms of circumstances, not from people, but from circumstances, I will remind myself of what is important. And most of these circumstances that I find frustrating or annoying have no real value. And in this way, I'll keep my mind undisturbed in the face of adversity, wherever it comes from. And what I'm doing here is of such great importance, strengthening my commitment not to bring harm to others, strengthening my determination to be of benefit to others, developing a loving, caring attitude towards others. This is wonderful that I'm doing this. And it's bringing pleasure to my mind, and I commit to continue to do so, to turn away from my inclination for anything that's harsh or non-virtuous, but to strive in virtue such as this. And all this virtue I'm creating through ethics, generosity, patience, joy, perseverance. I make the prayer with this dedication that I continue this from life to life, that in the life immediately after this and all lives to come, I only attain precious human rebirths where I can continue my spiritual journey, continue to be of benefit to others. So in this way, through merely going through these few minutes of this thought process, we are accumulating virtuous karma, or as the Tibetan literally says, white karma. And this is how we develop the foundational training of developing a focused and determined mind, a mind that lets go of what's unimportant, a mind that is not so distracted by mundane pleasures, that's so overwhelmed by mundane problems, but where we're starting to develop a more wider and expansive mind. And this is indispensable for the later trainings that are yet to come. And these karmic causes that we are creating here, their virtuous effects, these are non-deceptive. In other words, we can have confidence that they will follow.
Tenjin Jawa Chung, Tenjin Jawa Chung di Rindu Som Sidida, that Tenjin Jawa Chung we Korea, and this some down Gomgore says Sungorwa. Just a Tenjin Jawa Chung said the decision of Shuba de Dare, Debu, Digidi, and you Gawale Tene, Yungore, she's a Gawatella Tene, Yungur Mata Gawat Martin, De Yamare, Dumadi and you Migawale Tene, Yungur Bazana, Teneki. Miguel Latine, Yungor, Madame Tilematin Badi, Jebu Tungadia, Yomarva, Chitadina, the Chi Yungo, sometimes and Jebu Carchum, Benacoron, you, Savanchi Latine, and it Jebu the Yungurimato, and the Savanchila, Guchila Matempa, Jebu, Yomarva, Mevas and Denege, some that Tension Jawa Chua, Gutela, Jebu, the Guchi Latine, Yunguyopata, Gutela Tine, Jebu, the Yunguyoba, some tidy, and the Tension Jawa Chua, Undigi Tension Jawa, some Tana did this that he, Yamne, some Tana did not do three.
And the next line, then Lama Tsongkhapa says, emphatically, keep dependence arising in mind from today. Here we can understand dependence arising as being dependence on causes, which means, as from what we've just looked at, from causes, independence on causes follow results. Independence on virtuous causes follows happiness. Independence on non-virtuous causes follows suffering.
Just not the Tenjin Jawa Chunwa, Lavia de Delia, Jing Gudan, Jebu, Gundigi, Tenjin Jawa Chunwa, Seatita, that this is Nyama Shepa Najere. That didn't be Dene, but Chihensile, Gunde Mayana, Shihensile Dune, and the Trupte about the Shihensile Dune, Yovachilla, Tenjin Jawa, Tenjin, Dene, Gaso, Detape, Tenjin Saji, or Denegi, Tenjin Telia, Chara, Masona, Nichu, just a Gundig. Gundig Tenje said, Gunje Mayana dinner tabi Tenje said, or the Tene Samdana, Tendeke, Dunda Nyungor de la.
The presentation on dependence arising can be divided in differing ways, but a division into two is one, which is similar to what we've just been looking at, dependency on causes. And this can be expressed, as I just have, in dependence on causes follow results. Dependence on virtue follows happiness. Second way to divide dependence arising, so the first is dependence on causes, and the second is that of interdependency or mutual dependency.
Karsore, Anzo Lapa in Anzu Subula Dine, Bashirwa, the Lapa Ting and Subula Dine, Yore, Dine, Madon the Lapa de Mena, Kasubud Mena, Lapa de Subud, Jung such Merva, Subula Dine, in a Subud, the Lapa, you did Kaimaro, when you can yum to you, to be young to your Dineshi. And Dinashi, Danganzu Bene. 行动嘛是呢，对行动人不善的、通动善的，看的时候是行动人不善的，行动通啊起来对的或人不都是这些嘛都，或者经常嘛都嘛那的人不都的通啊都是呢人通这些买的，就是人不善的通啊起来对的或人不善下的，但人不通了呢，那人不起来对的我通啊的效果了吧？就是的呢在的说起来对的，那点的大会给点的大会给人不善的通啊起来对的，人不效果的，通通下的人不起来对呢，通效果的，这样积极的对我的那人通你的运转嘛的话呢。喇叭的速度，喇叭的速度来电的用过了吧？那是喇叭速度电的了吧？速度对吧？那速度的喇叭举着本身举嘛了吧？可是那个喇叭速度你们的借用过了话呢？用的那举的你了就真这不接触过了吧？
So the first, as mentioned, dependence arising can be presented in different ways. So a twofold division is dependency on causes and mutual dependency. So to give illustrations of mutual dependency, there's an interdependent or mutually dependent relationship between our body and our arms. So this is not a relationship of cause and effect. It's not an effect of having a body that one has arms, but there is an interdependent relationship between them. Another illustration is short and tall. Something can only be tall in relation to it being something else being short. But what is short is not a cause of what is tall, and what is tall is not a cause of what is short. But there is still an interdependent relationship, but it's not a relationship of dependency on causes.
实际上，当然这个喇叭也把的原把是也的原写的原把的来的呢也效果了，也把也来的呢原把效果了。经常经嘛都没呢也原是这是该要嘛了，就是那的也的原写的和原这嘛来的，那也的来对呢的原的效果，原的来对呢和也的效果了。的那这样子这把它去原本呢，怕晓得的来怕的噻，这样子的呢处理来个哇。 就是的，拍个日的来对呢，我是电有把它处理些个哇。就是电来对呢，拍出来有把它拍的些个，就是说机器来对呢，拍效果了，就是电呢搭配电这些个了的，电的地头是的。
Furthermore, left is interdependent or mutually dependent with right. One can only talk about a left arm independence on there being right arms. But a left arm is not a cause of a right arm, and a right arm is not a cause of a left arm. Similarly, near and far, or here and there, something can only be far in relation to something being near. Something can only be here in relation to there being something over there. So this is a relationship of a mutual dependency, not a relationship of cause and effect.
我都是点的特别点的，就是点的在当然这个搞了什么东西，这些人是什么大的，给我起码他的米国帮特别吃多的，点那个给我主要的给我起码他的米国会特别吃多的。那这里对生活中塔尔巴塞的特别给什么的，这里这个塔尔巴塞的特别给什么的，你们这边呢？那个什么个是当过是呢？就是他这些些把那些。 我说我东岸来，刚刚这里的刚刚多，这里塔尔古都生别个什么大，但今年塔尔班的米绿top呢，我说我东岸他的米个我等，我说我东岸来塔尔来的，东岸来塔尔古都要了呢，啊，这来东岸塔尔个门都现在米绿top呢，定义电话现在 top 门都，或者第一碰上错吧，定义第一 top 门都，东岸他的来出门都， 就是的米点了呀，今年呀，年那这样呀，这个冒出样呀，那这个中央储备金也刚刚把多没把去忙不去，休息都三百个的，的那个这个刚刚的三大的，到底弄啊他那些他好多三百的，可以说的拉的米的，他更就可以弄啊他那他好多三百个三了见呢。可以弄来他的来他的别个的，他把头部都，他把些头部都三百个，那多年去都是结活的。你多年他把多年也结来的，那他把特别吃多，你那个这另外是也绝对别出这么说下的，这些他年龄节的，他公路卡的，嘛的公，他的年龄节的，另外是个人也绝对别出这么说下，谁把公庙真的怎么样？那这这个说的，马兰节的用过的，那第一个了呀，那定义成三代公庙。定呢，大面把都被东方人都被写了过面，我的年辈台湾人的才过了，定义成过面的，大面把东方人都被写了过面，我都是呢年龄节的，我都是呢才过来些，第三定呢啥的，定呢告诉我的电竞这话中啊，现在大面把多把了的，电竞这话中啊，三大就东方人多过，那大面把多钱的公布在电竞这话区别都是呢，定嘛，但。코와를 드비고 유 다음에 것도 배시라 거미하고 송고
Just before giving what Geshe said, just to add to some from earlier, when things are mutually dependent on each other, they don't have a relationship of cause and effect with each other, but rather a relationship of mutual dependence. That being said, it doesn't mean they don't have causes individually, but they do not cause each other, but they have a relationship of mutual dependency. So just to make that clear. And then, from what Geshe has just said now, so I've mentioned thus far already that the prior trainings are our foundation to our prior trainings to achieve a further excellent rebirth are our foundational trainings for the later practices. Without that foundation, the later practices cannot be fully achieved, cannot be achieved. So having spoken about then the foundational practices, we can then talk, and the foundational goal of attaining another good rebirth, we can talk about a second goal, that of attaining liberation. So when one is striving for a good rebirth, one is striving to, once again, like in this life, attain liberation from rebirth in the lower realms, to rather attain rebirth in the higher realms. But such liberation from rebirth in the lower realms is temporary. There remains the danger of falling to the lower realms in our next life. Moreover, we are not yet at all liberated from the sufferings of samsara. We know about the limitless sufferings that human beings experience. We experience them ourselves, we've observed them in the world. So the second major goal to strive for is that for liberation from suffering. Liberation from the sufferings of samsara in its entirety. This is built on the foundation of striving for a good rebirth, for another precious human rebirth. When one strives for liberation, one includes those same practices that have already been presented: ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance. So the practices, those four practices remain the same, but they are done with a greater motivation. The motivation now is not merely or not only for a further good rebirth, but the motivation for engaging in ethics, generosity, and so forth is to create the causes that will lead to liberation. So the motivation differs, but the practices are the same. But in addition to those four practices, two more are added. And these are concentration and wisdom. Wisdom in particular, the wisdom realizing selflessness, or can be called the wisdom realizing emptiness. So these two practices are added, concentration and wisdom, to the same four, but the motivation now very clearly is different. The motivation is for liberation from samsara, rather than to achieve another good rebirth.
제보텔라 아니 가서 타르바세 톱투고래 지산 되네 자다 도시네 지산데 군론기 조도 군론기 타르바토비 유차야다 아니 개와치마 미다 미 고반삼 토베 규차이디 군론라리고 제단 군론들라 나서 코르에 나서 코르에 동아 타달을 저고도 델려 주베 타르바 토부도 셈베 삼다에도 아니 디기 된다라야 안징에 밀류야바 토마토바네 땡데라 곰고라 지데 밀류 땡야고 마도나 곰자고 고투마르 지다 디자 밀류기 고 라다미고 토고야 가서 띵에 좀 곰고로와 딘드에텔라 곰자 투마로 지자 밀류 야고 토고로 써야지 띵이진 곰야게 된다래 띵야고 싶고 선배 토에 된다래 밀류 토에 된다래 규수좀 쌓아야 돼 어두시네 어디 제자다 될이야 양아 저거 대시 자위 시자의 곰 직바이면 디간이야 신년 줍제 띵이진 곰야다 디네 다음에 봐또 배셔랍 다음에 봐또 진짜 또 배셔랍게야 게 다음에 봐또 배셔라기네 다음에라 미비기다 시라 손주 줍제 곰바이네 지정하는 저 녀모바 차상을 저 두고 그래. 세상 빵빵투 빵네. 탈바 톱투고 그래. 세상 탈바 톱의 유리 디레에서 그러다. 군론들에 다보 콜위가 소동을 탈치 탈고도 내래 탈네 탈바 톱도 선배 담보 군론되지. 니 된다라다 탈바 톱에로 곰들에 곰자고 곰발라 띵 캐버지 고고 세상디 디 된다라 하다미고 톱의 체도 인세 추림 소야. 다 는 저거 고미하다 전도 디네기다 저거 고미하디 디자마이마다 냠는 제발아 고르와 어디네기다 디네 다 뇽모 빵발라 다음에 봐도 베시랍 곰제 디기 빵고 그래 님보 땡지 공부 제자 뇽모 베기 빵발라 다음에 봐도 베시랍 공부도 제자 다음에 봐도 베시랍 디 디야 안에지 그 뉴베치 뭐 그걸 제가 제집에 띵이 좀 신의 좀 신의 디딩 안에다 다음에 봐도 베시랍라 미베게 제 라돈 좀제 디곰발 하돈이 시라 손대도 곰발을 때네 녀모바 차상기 녀보제 빵제 빵투거래 제가 디네자 디던다 탈바토에 되네 디냠네 지기 인세베 다지 삼다지 디냠네 지고 그래서 그러다
When one has as a motivation to attain liberation from samsara as its entirety, there are 6 practices that one cultivates within. 4 have already been discussed: ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance. So those 4 practices remain the same, but the motivation differs greatly. So when one is striving to cultivate ethics, we'll express it like this: when one develops the determination not to cause any harm, to rather be ethical in order to gain a good rebirth. Another way to express that is one is determined to be ethical so as to create the causes for a good rebirth and not to create the causes to fall to the lower realms. So this is how one practices ethics in order to attain another precious human rebirth. A practitioner who's striving for liberation will have the same practice of ethics, the determination to refrain from bringing any harm to others through the way of speaking, the way of acting, way of thinking. But the motivation is to attain liberation. So the practitioner will be thinking, I will not be unethical, because if I am, I'm creating the causes to continue to remain suffering in samsara. Whereas if I am ethical, I will be creating the causes for freedom from samsara. So here, when one is striving for a good rebirth, one is only striving for freedom or liberation from falling into the lower realms in the next life. But when one is striving for liberation, one is striving for liberation from all realms of samsara, from the sufferings of samsara in its entirety. So therefore, this is a goal that is far greater. But whilst a practitioner is striving for liberation, explicitly has as their motivation the attainment of liberation from samsara in its entirety, as this is a process that will take many lifetimes, implicitly, the virtue that's been accumulated will also achieve the temporary goals of good rebirths. But the causes that are being accumulated are motivated by a wish for liberation from samsara, but implicitly, those causes will also lead to good rebirths. So there does not need to be an explicit motivation to achieve good rebirths if one is sincerely striving for liberation, because implicitly good rebirths are achieved as one progresses towards the attainment of final liberation. So to achieve actual liberation from samsara, in addition to the 4 causes that have already been presented, one also has to cultivate powerful concentration and the wisdom realizing selflessness. And the reason that these are required is in order to gain liberation from samsara, one needs to abandon all the afflictions together with their seeds. That has to be abandoned. And that is abandoned through the wisdom realizing selflessness, and that wisdom needs to be particularly powerful. It needs to be conjoined with the union of calm abiding and meditative insight. Only then will that wisdom realizing selflessness have sufficient strength to eradicate the afflictions together with their seeds and lead to the attainment of liberation from the sufferings of samsara. So that's why these 2 additional causes of concentration and wisdom are required to lead to the final result of liberation from suffering. But again, those 2 causes, concentration and wisdom, alone cannot lead to liberation. They require the foundational causes of ethics, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance. But those causes are now being accumulated with this greater motivation of liberation. So again, to give an illustration, when someone who's striving for liberation practices generosity, they have that same wish. I will give of myself to others. I will be there for others. I'll benefit them as much as I can because I'm wanting to create causes for liberation from samsara. So they're still practicing generosity, but with a different motivation. And again, the additional causes of concentration and wisdom are added in order to achieve this far greater results.
대시 당보시에 대해서 롭산 마선도 롭산 중화되지 다디시에디 롭산 마선 롭산 체화도 됐을까래가로 최고로 받아 롭산 체화.
The foundational practices to achieve a good rebirth, this is a smaller goal, and therefore the causes that are created are required are relatively easier than for this greater goal. Moreover, this greater goal is more difficult to understand, to wrap one's head around.
나데네 나 숨바디 상지 고바 토야리야 나 상지 토바 토야리데 디시세 다디세 딩한 저기 탈바 토야 규티 삼다나 지지와 탈바 토야 규 삼다나지 나는 상지 다 탈비 고바다네 고바 초도 규바데 상지 고바리 다 상지 고바 토발라 규 삼로 가리 땅고레세데 난 삼도 땅고레세데 상 탈바 탐지 김고 고바도 규디 가리라나 나 담보 당아주다 나 군노래 담보 군노 고고래 군노데 가리라는다 semjen tamje dewa dubata dungami duba jigbare samje chisa semjen tamje dewa dubata dungami duba jigbare chisa rang semjen kowe dunga de targo bana semjen tamje kowe dunga le targo gudu semjen tamje le digi chu ra gudu ta ngara jigbu mare chasan le semjen changma la kan de chi ne chasan le ya digi ra gudu semjen tamje dunga le ra gudu chisa di ra gudu de 동아요에 유디 가를 연구해서는 지금 뇽몽바를 때문에 연구를 했어. 말아서 라션 참말로 동아요 뇽몽바 때 연구를. 뇽몽바 대양 자위 유 된지 마릭 바텔 때문에 연구를 했어. 지산 디메바서 방고를 했어. 지산다 sem전 탐제 대화된 den고도 선배 삼로 다야다. sem전 탐제 동아다 자고도 선배 삼다. 된다 sem전 동아다 간에 시작을는 sem전 탐제 동아요 유디 메바서 고도 디 유메바서야 돼. 당이 바 sem전 탐제 동아 유메바서야 돼. 이 지기 이 저기 탑람 된제 콘솔이야 남된 제제 콘솔 냠는 제주제 sem전 탐제 동아다 자고다 제제 sem전 탐제는 ya tarbi ko phale ya thobar jigin ngin jigin sembe du chen sam da de ben chamba da da ni je de ne asanam da sam da sam du de an de sam da de 다 디장에다 제발라 다심자 탐지기 돈다라 게 상지 고파도 마도 탑미도 제자다 이 상지 고파 토벌 지긴 토벌 쇼 셈베 삼로디 다 장슈 셈제 바시고 장슈 셈시고 제자 셈제 탐지기 도는 게 상지 고파 토벌 지긴 셈베 삼로디 장슈 셈제 나 군롱은 디 토네 디 군롱 제 셈제 탐지기 도는 게 상지 고파 토벌 지긴 다 토벌랑아 가르쳐 올랍도 진배 냠는 수준이 수배 냠는 전례 냠는 는 다음에 받아 띵에 진나 셔럽 다음에 뭐또 띵에 진나 셔럽 니냠네 지기스도 대신 니버디다 직버래다 진보 수준 쇠버 전류 삼대 셔라 냠는 제바 직버 이발라 공로디라 셈자 탐제 디기 주변다 셈자 탐제 동아세야断다라 네 지기 네 상강아세 네 판도 주기 디엔상 나 상교고방 네 상교고방 토구도 네 상교고방 톱나 니 혼자라 판도 야침버지 투데 디엔상 상교고방 토구도 셈비 군로디레다 장주semje 디 군네라제 군로디케제 군로디 톤데다 냠는 라란데 진보 수준 쇠버 전류 삼대 셔라 어디 냠는데 셔야세 어디 냠는 제발에 때네 다 상교고방 토구래제래다 Somebody do me lamen. This thinking draw to a decoy in my order.
There are three primary goals within Buddhism. The first, we've looked at in more detail, that of attaining another good rebirth. The second is what I've briefly presented here, that of attaining liberation from samsara. And this objective is for, this middle objective is for attaining liberation for oneself from samsara. There is a higher goal, a higher objective, and that is the attainment of Buddhahood or enlightenment itself. And what stands out, makes the attainment of the third goal stand out, is its unique motivation. The trainings are very similar to the trainings for the middle goal for liberation, but the motivation is quite remarkable. So the motivation for the attainment of Buddhahood can only become about independence on the cultivation of the foundational steps. It requires a foundational training. Because when the actual motivation to attain Buddhahood starts with a recognition of others and myself are really no different. So to be able to recognize the equality between all beings, one has to have already come to understand one's own mind, one's own situation well. So a practitioner has already meditated well on how to attain liberation from samsara, why one is bound in samsara, and so forth. They are skilled enough, their mind is developed enough to actually develop this third motivation, this motivation for Buddhahood. So they are able to, already having seen that they are motivated by a desire for happiness and freedom from suffering, and others are no different from me. So this is something that was mentioned in the very, very first talk. So we take that, and it's been well established now by the meditator. But what is also now seen through their subsequent training is that the reason that I suffer, and the reason is the same reason that others are suffering, are afflictions. When our mind is afflicted by, for example, attachment, anger, jealousy, hate, ignorance, and so forth, we are suffering, and we are creating the causes for further suffering. This is the case for me, and this is the case for all others. So when I yearn to be free of suffering, I'm really yearning to be freed of these afflictions. When others want to be free of suffering, even if they don't recognize why they are suffering, it's these afflictions that they too want to be freed of. So this meditator now, who is actually ready to generate the motivation required to strive for the greatest goal, that of Buddhahood, they have also recognized that not only is it these afflictions that cause one to suffer, all these afflictions have one particular affliction as their root cause, the ignorance of self-grasping. From this ignorance of self-grasping, and this ignorance is a different ignorance from what was presented earlier, this ignorance of confusion. This ignorance of self-grasping, from it arises all the other afflictions, attachments, anger, jealousy, pride, and so forth, and therefore all our suffering. So this meditator has already recognized all of this in relation to themselves and is now lifting their view up from their own desire to gain lasting freedom, lasting happiness, and recognizing others are in the same position as themselves. When their heart opens in this way, they develop their hearts, their love and their compassion for others, to the point where they see others wandering lost in the darkness of confusion, creating ever more causes for their ongoing suffering despite yearning for happiness. They take the attainment of lasting happiness of all beings, all without exception, as their own personal responsibility. They take it as they develop a wholehearted resolve or an altruistic attitude of universal responsibility for others, which means the meditator takes as their responsibility to guide each and every being to gain freedom from suffering, to guide all other beings to train their mind in the same way that the meditator has been training and still needs to train. But then the final step in this motivation is the recognition that whilst I have this sincere commitment, this determination, I do not have the skill. I am still limited within myself. I am still an ordinary being bound in the suffering realms of samsara. I am unable to skillfully guide others. But a Buddha can. A Buddha, a perfected being, a being that has completely eradicated all faults and thereby perfected all good qualities, can guide each and every being in accordance with their own unique personalities. Therefore, I have to become a Buddha. And the reason I have to become a Buddha is to guide others to become Buddhas themselves. So when this mind is generated, this is the mind of bodhicitta, or in English, the mind of enlightenment. It's the determination has two components. The determination to become a Buddha, firstly, in order to lead others to attain freedom from suffering. Second quality. So here one generates the actual motivation, this motivation of bodhicitta, mind of enlightenment, that is required to attain the final goal of Buddhahood. This is the motivation to become a Buddha. And when that motivation is developed, one then engages in the 6 practices to create the causes to become a Buddha. These are the same practices as for liberation, which are ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. And how do they differ from the trainings of the practitioner who are striving for their own individual liberation? It's the motivation that differs. The motivation now is that of bodhicitta. The 6 practices remain the same, but they are now conjoined with the mind of bodhicitta. And these then make those same practices causes that will lead to enlightenment for the sake of all beings.
That is that simja tamju sanjo gobon to be chu sam ta ha de ne nyamlen che su de so samlo na ya samlo ta de ro da sam ta de ro.
Reviewing those first 2 lines, even small positive and negative causes and effects are non-deceptive keep dependence arising in mind from today. So what we're seeing here is 4 foundational causes, that of ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, which need to be cultivated for good rebirth. Those same 4 causes are the foundation for training for individual liberation. They get conjoined with concentration and wisdom. But it's the same with those 4 causes of ethics and so forth remain the same, but the motivation for engaging in ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance is now one for individual liberation. And one adds then concentration and wisdom, making 6 causes. To those same 6 causes, if we change the motivation to one of bodhicitta, of a determination to become a Buddha, those same 6 causes then become causes for Buddhahood. So what I want to, I hope is really clear, is that what really differs between practitioners is not what necessarily what they are meditating on, but the motivation with which they are doing their meditation. Whether a practitioner is striving for good rebirth, liberation, or enlightenment, they strive in ethics, they strive in generosity, but their motivation differs.
Yeah. Now, that semjen tamjigido sanjio kofan tobi chirdo da nyamne samdada de jigi deshi shuban robsi shubena da dambo ngaro kunno samna kartan waresne da dambo samdama di kowada nga songyo dunga dang da je nga songyo dunga le ta hada mi samno jikewa ine da dunga dang kanga yobadi du shen samdaere 제사다 디네게 강어 여바 통여도 오다디 강아 델레데 탈고구도 선비가 삼로시다 다 강아 된 탈고도 선비 삼다데 다 소소 지구 타는 지구데 현다되게 타는 지구도 두시데 랑 동을 미디어바나 이제 심전 탐제 동을 두고 고고 말에 제사 소소 대화 대바는 심전 탐제를 대화 고고 지상 차상 대화 대바 집어 동을 미디어 집지게 아닌 마도 캬바 가요 말에서 되네 인자다 심전 탐제를 대화대 되나 대화 된 것 심전 탐제 대화대 템버쇼 선배 삼나다디 차고데 잠바고 바시고래 어두시는 거 다시 많이 봐서 지역도와 다 디젤이야 심전 탐제 대화 된 것 심다 심전 동화단 자와 쇼스 동화다 맞아나 안 대화대 대메르와 심전 동화단 자고도 동화단 자와 쇼 선배게 디삼다에다 디네 심전 대화 템버쇼 삼다 디네 심전 동화단 자와 쇼 선배 삼다 디제 림바제 디젤라 다 심지어 탐제 동안은 자고도 다 간스 자고람나 다 심지어 탐제야 즉 동안 대기 탑람 되지 컨트롤해야 되네 제제 지게 네디 제고도 상해 컨트롤에 판도 주고도 컨트롤이 디기 주야 컨트롤에 디기야 네직 제고도 컨트롤 동안 써야 돼 네 제고도 지사다 네 간스 제고람나 컨트롤에 람든 제고도 동안 써야 돼네 칼라 제고 제바 지비기 동안 세 투야민도 디기 그래서 땡기 대화 톱투야 민도와 대상의 컨트롤이야 탑런드 파티 콘솔레시 냠주 렌주제 네 심지어 탐제 다 네지 동안에 자다 디기 주에티 네티 콘솔 마친제 탑민 우선비게 삼나다에도 다 네지긴 셈베 삼면 소소글이야 셈쇼다 인도로 시우시게제 제제여도 데네텔이야 하산남다 콤바레스 거다 하산남다세 남보도 스파니시잖아
So to go through briefly the cultivation of the motivation that's required to generate bodhicitta itself. So depending where we are, we can start right at the beginning, developing, first reflecting briefly on the sufferings of the lower realms, to have the determination, I do not want to fall into such a pitiful state. How fortunate I am to have this precious human rebirth. And in fact, this precious human rebirth, which is so difficult to gain but is easily lost and has such great potential, I must utilize what I've achieved right now. And I must utilize it to achieve a goal far greater than merely just another good rebirth. I need to bring an end to the sufferings, my own experiences of suffering in its entirety, gain liberation from the sufferings not just of the lower realms but of the higher realms as well. But I can't, so there we've gone through from the first level of motivation to the second level, and now we take it to the third. But others, all others, are in the same position as me. No one wants to suffer. We all want to be free. I now have come to recognize the subtleties of how beings suffer, how I suffer, as well as the causes for that. Others are still lost in confusion. They need to have guidance, just like I've attained. And they need to cultivate causes for lasting happiness, just like I am trying to do now. So here, in the third part of the meditation, we're developing a motivation where we're holding others as dear, we're valuing others, we're developing an affectionate, loving attitude towards others, and we develop that into actual love, the wish, may all beings abide in happiness, freed of problems and suffering, and in that way we generate compassion. And how will beings attain that? They will be guided. They need to be guided just like I am being guided, to cultivate the causes that lead to happiness and to eradicate the causes that will otherwise lead to suffering. They need to cultivate positive causes and abandon negative causes. I will help them. I take responsibility for the welfare of each and every being. And here then in our motivation, we've developed this wholehearted resolve, or this altruistic attitude of universal responsibility, where we take as our own personal responsibility others attaining freedom from suffering.
다행히 편도 두기 선비게 삼다징이 지긴 세비 소소닝도 끼에도 다 소소라래 삼당이 대 편도 두기에 가나를 다디 누비 뒤에선 다등할 누버민도스 제가 나 Bendigo control labiage control pando ruye chido ngana alia anji ya lamden chasang duen xin ba da hao ko wa yuan den ding ala ko hu dus dadi pando je tugen ji gen ga me ji pando phunsu so ba je tugen di sangji se de sangji go ba de sha di le la wa min je da dang sangji go ba ma tab me do je sang e semje tamje le digi ruye da semji dunga se ge don da lang e sangji go ba thoba ji thoba shows je sang e sangji go ba thob ne control ya pando ruye dunga se gi je sang e semje tamje sangji go ba thobi pando ruye chi dunga sangji go ba ma tab me de sang e sangji go ba thoba show sembe sam ji yo de jang ju semje ba so de jang ju semse ni ko me de re 다 되네게 장주심 기능이 심지어 탐지 산주 고모 토고 인자다 니 토고 인자다 알아 산주 고모 토발라 니 레가 가르 냠네 삼노 가르당 로스네 되네 류가 이수니 제도 베츠림 소야 류가 데 츠림 소야다 데 대시 데 쇠바 고미 진바 진베 냠네 쇠베 냠네 쩐제 냠네 되네 띵해진 고미야다 되네 동바이 또 비셔라 고미야 어두시네 냠네 제야데 삼다 냠네 제야데다 산주 고모도 비규리에 시자디 냠네 제야디레서 오다
In this meditation, I hope it's clear that as one is developing one's meditation, one's developing an ever stronger determination. Firstly, it's about I will not fall to the lower realm. Secondly, I will bring an end to my suffering in its entirety. So this is a far more powerful determination. And now when you come to the third level, and I will strive not only for my own well-being, but for every single being. Progressively, as one progresses, one's mind becomes ever broader, more expansive, with a far more far-sighted outlook. One is not at all bothered by the comings and goings of one's ordinary life, but has a far greater goal at the forefront of one's motivation. So hopefully this is clear, how one progresses and radically transforms one's way of thinking as one actually progresses to this level. So in this reflection, we've got to the point where one's taken responsibility for the welfare of others. And the reality, when we reflect on this, is there's very little we can do for others. We can, with good motivation, give excellent advice, but that advice is so seldom received well, or so seldom has a great impact on others. And this is because of in part, our own limitations. We don't know how to give the ideal advice for that moment to that person. But a Buddha has no such limitations from their side. Their capacity has been perfected. So therefore, in order to help others, I have to completely transform my mind, eradicate every trace of fault so that each good quality is developed perfectly. I therefore will become a Buddha so as to benefit others. And that is the mind of bodhicitta. When bodhicitta is generated, we then engage in the same meditations that by this point one has meditated on many times, but now they are conjoined with bodhicitta, they are joined together. So with this determination to become a Buddha for the sake of others, one once again meditates on ethics. I will not harm others, these dear precious beings. I want to take them to enlightenment. How can I harm them? In fact, I'll benefit them, I'll give them everything I have, I'll help them in all ways that I can. And when I experience hardships, I will be patient. I will not let that deter me at all, because others matter to me so. And so forth. Joyous perseverance, concentration, and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So in this way, these 6 practices we continue once again to meditate on, but now they are conjoined with bodhicitta.
Di nyamlen chebadi denege samdatu se nyamlen chebaina digi sosorana samdabe denege nyamden ngara ju sosorana samdang semje 탐지기 된다 samda nyamlen 지고로 와다 디 nyamlen chebadigi rani kowe 동안에 droche kowe 동안에 두고래 안디 맛에 안디 지가 저기 개와치 말 하다미 고방 톱투고 어디 되니기 다 대가 저기 산조 고방 투비 쳐도 람 냠는 집에 림바데 냠는 제바 있나 디기 개와치 말 하다미 고방 톱투고래 톱고래 하다미 고방 돌에 디기 두투고래 안디 맛에 안디 코에 동아 타달래 저 투고래 지자 안디 산지 semja 탐지 dundu sanyo gopadeya top-tugo ware shereda nga tsuki dus chene di lam nyamne rinpaade gombayna cheza di nyamne rinpaade da chiki yaksho di di gombayna chasang rup-tugo wade chago ware.
So here, the practitioner is solely generating a meditation, a motivation of bodhicitta, whereby their concern for the welfare of others is first and foremost. They hold others as dear, wanting the very best for them. So the motivation of such a practitioner is with sincerity. All that they do, say and think is about bringing benefit to others. And bringing benefit to others in the way that is of greatest meaning. If some transitory, temporary benefit is given to others, that's fine. But even such benefit is given to others so as to help them attain full enlightenment. That is the motivation of this practitioner. But in order to actually fulfill that motivation, the practitioner has to become a Buddha themselves. So therefore the motivation is explicitly to benefit others. Implicitly, they need to become a Buddha themselves. To become a Buddha, implicitly, it's implied that that practitioner has to achieve liberation from suffering themselves, gain freedom from samsara. And for that to come about, implicitly as part of this motivation, they have to attain good rebirths, to continue their process of ongoing spiritual development. So therefore, whilst such a practitioner has at the forefront of their mind the attainment of helping others attain enlightenment, because of that motivation, they will achieve first their own Buddhahood, and prior to that, their own liberation, and prior to that, an ongoing process of good rebirth so that they can continue their spiritual development and attain liberation and enlightenment. So therefore, with a sincere motivation to benefit others, all other spiritual goals are indirectly achieved.
Dine zadang haran zuge semje tamje dewa de dena sembe samlo de ya jamje komje je samlo de haran zuge la zaibi ge sabon de haran zuge le yor wa da haran zu chasang gyule ya semje de dewa de dena de yakure sembe samlo ju yor wa da semje de dungan na jana yakure sembe samlo ju yor wa so le da semje tamje 량이 판도 제고 sembe samlo ju yor de ine da samlo 등에 가는 시월 제투에 누가 민도 왔으면 되고 와 세상은 삼로 요래 이내 디 삼로 등 아주 길 누가 침부지 리고 말 춤추지 마도 매래 그래서 뉴베 쳔보 레트고 말 뉴베 쳔보도 말해서 야네 삼동 공부에는 그 뉴베 삼로 뉴베 쳔 두고 말 진짜 디네 인자다 아주길라 자위기 아주 상미길라 샘제 지게 현현디기 디기 주나 선배 삼로 용고래 제자디 아주 야네도 공고걸 현 샘제 탐질 디기니 주나 선배 삼로다 제 디기 고비 김세 삼다 디기 중고비 김세 삼다 도체 삼다네 당 샘제는 디기 중어 쇼 디기 대화데 되나 선배 삼로데 지게시 야네 야도 쇼겐 바 당아주 디 투도 되네 삼다 야네 야도 삼다 왜네 디 삼로데 디나 삼로 쇼 쳇셔 게디나 삼로 코딩 하서시리야 제가 디나시 다심전 탐제 동화다 자고 동화다 자나 sabia samta이데 딩아도 자위기로 요르데 뉴버 침부 매바데 뉴버 침부 줘야데 야네야도 삼다제 야네야도 삼다 야네 삼도 곰세고라 곰세 야네야서 제가 야네야도 삼다바데 두시 뉴버 체르고라 제가 디네자 아주 곰세 두시는 아주 자위기라 잠베 심제 탐제라 잠바다 요레 제외 삼노다 요레 이나 뉴버 침부 차고야데 매바자 디 차야데 야네야도 곰제 공부를 해서지 두순거라 나서
To become such a person is something that we all have the capacity to do. All of us can. In fact, even the hardest-hearted person you know, the coldest-hearted person that you know, they even have this capacity. We all have the seeds of love and compassion within. And often we have experienced them within us. But we know from our lived experience that even when love and compassion arises, it doesn't last, it fades. But what we can recognize is two things. One, we have this possibility. It is not beyond us. And secondly, all that is required is just like with all the other good qualities that we have discussed, is strengthening our habituation to them. Whatever one trains in life, the more one trains in it, the more skilled one becomes. Whether this is to do with a mental quality or physical quality, the more one trains, the more skilled one becomes. And just like with all the other points of meditation, with this topic too, by repeatedly, over a sustained period, meditating on this topic, one becomes ever more habituated to it. So bear in mind, synonyms for meditation are habituation and familiarization. The process of meditation is the process where one becomes habituated to wholesome ways of thinking, breaks one's habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. So therefore, all one needs to do is repeatedly, over a sustained period, strive to think in particular ways and not in other ways. One sits quietly on a chair or on a cushion, such as we are doing in this retreat, to develop these habituations. But what is key is to continue at home and between meditation sessions, when going about one's daily business, calling these topics to mind, calling to mind the topics of love and compassion and so forth. Because this is how one becomes habituated to something, having these particular thought processes go around in our mind continuously. This is how we will become habituated to love and compassion, for example, so that love and compassion come to pervade who we are. And this is the case with all the topics, where we will become a genuinely ethical person, loving person, generous person, compassionate person, because these ways of thinking we have become so habituated to that in all circumstances, no matter whom we encounter, what situation we encounter, our natural response will be ethical, will be generous, will be loving, will be kind. And this is something we all can do. We have the seeds for love and compassion within us. For none of us is this too difficult.
Di zawa pandi di pandi zawa masuma sedi deji gangla shedi jisan jewa chima lada mi go bang zam tobe gi donda la tobe chidu ane yang na 데네기 아니 지마다 출음서 소바고마티게 냠는 치고 그래서 안 딜레 하바다데 타바토비 치도 아니 군노삼 디도나레 먼저 개와 냠는지야 아나 다심제 탐지기든 상조고바 토비 치르데 셰마 타비기 냠네 타바침비기 람녀 길에 기회 되는 냠내지야 돼 대서 냠내 지고 걸때 니 냠내 가야 마제바지에서 디 판대 자와 마송와 마송와서는 냠내 마제바죠 디 판대 판바단 디위기 자와암 규디에 대해서 강을 냠내지야 셰르바 대서 냠내 마제바제 아내가 개발에 나 지시고 신구에 선배 내 유니 제집에 띵에지 공부이나요 아니 셰라 근데 판도요 말해서 지게 니기 안에 데니게 삼라 공로하다 되디 대시 셰바나 좀 반대 자와지 마고마지 어당아 개발 휴신이 띵에진 공부에서 제집에 띵에서 공부에서 데니 띵에진 가지고 공부이나야 니기라 내가 저게 탈비 고바 톱투고 말 산유 고바 톱투 말에서 그러다 띵에진 공부이나 대시 띵에진 삼대 대시는 저게 타바도 요군롱기 토네당 안에 심지어 탐지에 상계 고방 토비 치료도다 개와치말 하다 미고방 토비 군롱가 매바제 땅아 신구에서 제지도 셈 제지를 내베 딩이 좀 검되어 있네야 딩이 좀 주비에 가고래라 안에 디기 안에가 타바다 탐지 김부 고방 톱수고 말해서 그러다
The last two lines in the 12th verse. The root of spiritual and temporal well-being has not been attained due to conceit. Sustained meditative concentration needs to be practiced. So the root of spiritual and temporal well-being, this refers to a motivation for liberation or enlightenment. So liberation and enlightenment are what will lead to the attainment of lasting. The motivation to achieve liberation and enlightenment is the motivation required to finally achieve the goals of lasting happiness, as well as all the temporary states until one achieves that. But if someone chooses to neglect all that has been presented thus far, the need to develop such a motivation, first the motivation to achieve a good rebirth, so as to bring one's mind into one's focus lives beyond this, so that one can stop having the mind dominated by achieving insignificant pleasures and overcoming meaningless problems, but rather focusing for another goal, a greater goal. If one hasn't developed such a motivation, so the smallest motivation, it will not be possible to be thinking about liberation, let alone enlightenment. Similarly, without developing such a motivation and engaging in the accumulation of causes, ethics, generosity, patience, choice, perseverance, one will not have the foundational training to later develop an actual motivation for liberation or even enlightenment, because one will not yet have come to understand one's own mental processes well, understand oneself well, and thereby thinking about liberation and enlightenment will be superficial at best. So if someone hasn't gone through this process, made effort to cultivate the required motivations and those required trainings, but thinks, I'm just going to apply myself to develop single-pointed concentration, such a conceited approach will prevent one from making any progress towards liberation or enlightenment. Someone who thinks, I will develop meditative concentration and the pleasures, mental pleasures that come with that, and ignores everything else, they may be conceited in that they think they've achieved something wonderful because their mind is particularly blissful, but their spiritual development has actually been greatly impeded by their conceit.
comes from Nasoda, Tata Mi, some Ganestana, Dunga Janya, Jazan Korea, Dunga Dele, the Targo Duas, Jazara Chibuma, Ivaran, Semjan Tamjo Korea, Dunga, Targo, the Semjan Tamja, the Digi, the Dengodus, the Semjan Digi, the Temper Show, Sembe Samno Comia, the Semjan Dunga, the Jawa Show, Sembeke, the Samno de Comia. Dine Comne, and Semjan Tamjela Digi Jubiata, Semjan Tamji Dunga said, the Ngay Jigi, Semjalia, Ngay Pampage Dugi, Panto Dugi, Semjan Tamji Dunga de Ngay Segi, Semjan Tamji, Digi de Ngay Dugi, Sembeke, that's also Rangi, Dondama some Semjan Tamji Donda some Daje, Dushine, Dushe Samlichita. The nigger some do some of the Yane, Yando, Tanko, to start some of the Cheshire to water. Didn't I do some time to get done that and he took me sit that, he drew Balang, Twinking Kaham, Chizan, Twinking Nuba the temper so do, Chizan Nuba temper so the San Yokopa the Resha, Chizada, Ni San Yokopa the Mato the Tamido, San Yokopa Tower Show, Sempe Samnosta. Dine da some gentlemen, some gentlemen, San Yokopa to be children, Sempe dying on to get Gunua Dikeshe, Ditonda Langa together. Control Chubu Puenada, Semjalia Jimba Tanguinada, Sosuke, Jige, Chachigina, many arts and Yamnakum, Karechevena, Semja Tamji, the San Yokoba to be children, and be some nage, the gauge to Yadire. Jazadine Zadang, Semja, the San Yokoba to be children, Lunga use Michelle and never saw in the Chigime, Sempe, Lunga use Michelle and never Chena, Shanganga Tigre, Chizan Shan, Dunga Yungore, Chizang Shangi Dunga say 2 years, Sablia, Michelle, Dunga, Digim to us. Tangara Shangi Dunda, Dunga say, Dunda, Digi to Vigo to Nachi, setting it, Lunga is Michelle and never Chigme, Sempe, Duchin some Daje, Mansu, Sobocomiata, General Yamlechet, the name some diet. Gunwal Mason Jamba, Ninche, Hassam, Jashu Semchi Com, Gunwatike, Di Tony, also Laland, the Rangazuki, Gasore, Lunga Sunyeche Dom, and the Surim Soyatiche, Dene, Jimbe Yamla Ganto to Chiatiche, and the Servo Cometa, Junju Somialas, and Digalea, and Jelly, Chica, something, Zichin, Dingits in Trubia. The name and the time about to be Shera Comia, Lucine, Yamlechico, or Esha, Dangan to Lucine. And the time about the things in the Tumato by now, some Dambohorn Jayadi, the Semja Korea Dunga, comes from Korea Dunga, Hajila Tau, to Sempe Samata, D. Dandala, Semja Digi, the Demba, Semja Dunga, the Java, Semja Disuyane and Comiata, D. Chine, Semja Dunga, Java, the Nachi, Digi to the Ni Juguin, the Enzang Semja San Yokoba Tobachi, Sempe, Lucian, some died that. The Lobsang Dorje, that's all Dirang. That eating as a Yane Yano, some died, Gawana, Chick, the Shogun, some died to win it, Nimodiwana, Gidina, go up Gidir, and this some died, Yamlin, some died, and Yamlin just Semleya, Yane Yado, Secomse, Kasanga, Kizinti, Sije, Didua, Nabadilla, Gogola, Wenjang, Guibi, Nyola, Yana, Yang. Yabar Damna, Yabar Toba Jursen. Nabachesa, Ni Chonzu, Ni Shea, Yane Yando, Chonzu, Ma She Dam, Chonzu in a di, Ma She, Yane Yando, Gombana, Yagi Jogris, Yabar Toba Yagi Jogris. Chesa did that's Shea. Chizang didn't get Lobsang to share that and also Gedina, that the Lobsang didn't get the Shea and Yamlin, but Gedina, Danzo. Chen Yamlin Jag, all did that Gedina go and a check a ship and Yamlin Jag, Yamlin Jedan did. That's all San Yokoba to which the Yamlin Jag did this Sungor or down.
Summarize then quite briefly what we've looked at is that to transform one's mind, one needs to gather knowledge and integrate that knowledge through meditation, become habituated to wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking. The first point to cultivate within is a recognition of just what we have achieved, how remarkable this human rebirth is, both from the perspective of its rarity and its great meaning, hence it is something so precious. And following that is the recognition, but this life is impermanent. This opportunity is impermanent. This session of meditation, this part of my day, is all going to come to an end. Do not let it go to waste again. Utilize it well by taking care of my mind. With such a motivation, one strives to accumulate the causes for a good rebirth, So you know the causes, but I'll just repeat the first one as we go through the meditation because of time restraints, but the process is the same. So one then meditates on ethics, the determination not to bring harm to others, because if I create causes of unethical behavior, those will ripen as potential rebirth in the lower realms. I do not want to fall into the lower realms. I want to gain freedom from such a likelihood in my next life. So therefore I commit to not harming others. Then one can meditate further, recognizing that whilst it's imperative I gain a good rebirth in my next life, I will, as I am in this life, be bound in the suffering realms of samsara and experience unwanted problems and difficulties continuously. This I want to bring to an end. I want to attain that state of lasting freedom, a state where my mind is always at peace and ease. Anything I encounter will not harm me because my mind is liberated. Therefore, I must strive to gain liberation from the sufferings of samsara, the second motivation. And they're the meditations, that there are 6, but just to say the first, that of ethics. And therefore, I commit to not causing any harm to others through my physical behavior, speech, or way of thinking, because if I do so, I'm creating the causes that will keep me bound in the suffering realms of samsara. I will bring no harm to others, because I don't want to create further causes for suffering. Then one starts to cultivate the third motivation, the motivation where one starts to recognize, in the same way that I want to gain freedom from the suffering realms of samsara, so does every other being, whether human, animal, or unseen. Whether they recognize that they are in samsara, whether they recognize that they are suffering in the wide ways that I've come to see that we all are. Whether they've recognized this or not, they too yearn to be freed of all forms of suffering and pain. I have to help them because they matter. They matter to me. Their welfare, their attainment of happiness matters, and I will help them. I will guide them to achieve lasting happiness. But to do so, I have to become a Buddha myself. And therefore I commit to striving to become a Buddha so that I can be the most skilled of guides, guiding others to achieve lasting happiness. And this is where we generate the third motivation, that of bodhicitta. And then we engage in those 6 practices, just mentioning the first, that of ethics, where one commits once again, I will bring no harm to others. I will restrain my mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions. I do not want to harm others because they matter to me. I do not want to add to their burden of pain. So in this way one meditates on ethics, but here with the motivation of bodhicitta. And one meditates on all the practices, generosity, patience, joy, perseverance, concentration, and cultivates the wisdom realizing selflessness. But here then just to say that for those who do not have much of an understanding or a good enough understanding of selflessness or emptiness, that's okay. Engage in the other meditations. Engage in the meditations cultivating these various motivations. Meditate on ethics, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance. And one can still reflect or cultivate rather, all 3 levels of motivation. In particular, one can recognize the dangers of falling to the lower realms, so therefore one must achieve a good rebirth. And one can recognize that actually, in my own lived experience as a human being, I suffer. I want freedom from suffering in its entirety, and thereby generate the second level of motivation. And the third level, that of bodhicitta, where we value others as much as ourselves. This too, one can generate such a motivation without understanding emptiness. So the goal cannot be achieved, but the motivation can be. So if your understanding of emptiness is limited, that doesn't need to deter you. And then the final point to make is, as has been said many times, such as in the 5th verse, in the English, the 3rd and 4th line, only if you keep listening respectfully again and again to correct teachings will you attain excellent qualities. So listening respectfully, remembering that respectful includes with effort. So by listening to the same topics again and again, meditating on them again and again, that is the method by which one attains excellent qualities. And these excellent qualities have been mentioned already: ethics, generosity, patience, joy, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. And these excellent qualities, as well as the goals, in particular the final goal of enlightenment, presents the entirety of the path. So therefore, the entirety of the Buddha's teachings then have been presented here. At least we've touched on them. And thank you very much, and we'll conclude there for today. Thank you.